The afternoon sun was starting to fade when Margaret found herself standing outside the busy train station, completely lost. She was 78 years old, with silver hair neatly pinned back and wearing her favorite blue coat. But right now, nothing felt familiar anymore. Margaret had driven downtown that morning for a doctor's appointment. It was supposed to be a simple visit, just like she had done hundreds of times before. But somewhere between leaving the doctor's office and walking to find her car, everything became confusing. The streets that once felt like old friends now looked like strangers. She stood on the sidewalk watching hundreds of people rush past her. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. They walked fast, talking on phones or staring at screens. Margaret felt invisible, like she was standing behind glass while life moved around her. The first person she approached was a young man in a business suit. He was typing on his phone with both thumbs, walking quickly toward the station entrance. "Excuse me," Margaret said softly, reaching out to gently touch his arm. "Could you help me? I can't remember where I parked my car." The man barely looked up. He glanced at her for half a second, mumbled something about being late, and walked even faster. Margaret watched him disappear into the crowd. She tried again with a woman carrying a large purse and wearing headphones. "Please, I'm lost," Margaret said, raising her voice a little. The woman pulled out one earbud, shook her head, and pointed toward the information desk inside the station before hurrying away. Margaret looked toward the station entrance. The information desk seemed so far away and there were so many people. The noise and movement made her head spin. She had always been independent, driving herself everywhere, managing her own life. This feeling of helplessness was new and frightening. A group of teenagers walked by laughing loudly about something on one of their phones. Margaret stepped toward them. "Young people, could you please help an old lady? I think I'm lost." One of them looked at her with annoyance. "We don't know anything about cars, lady," he said, and they all walked away, still laughing. Margaret felt her eyes getting wet. She had lived in this city for over 50 years. She had raised 3 children here, worked at the local library for 25 years, and volunteered at the community center. But right now, she felt like a stranger in her own hometown. The evening rush was beginning. More and more people poured out of the station and onto the streets. Margaret tried to stop several more people. A woman with a stroller who said she was sorry but was already late picking up her other child. A man with a briefcase who pretended he didn't hear her. Another woman who looked genuinely sorry but said she wasn't from around here and couldn't help. Margaret's legs were getting tired. She found a small concrete ledge near the station entrance and sat down. She opened her purse and looked for her phone, but when she found it, she couldn't remember her daughter's number. She knew it started with the area code, but the rest was fuzzy. The security guard at the station entrance was busy directing people and managing the flow of crowds. He looked overwhelmed, talking into his radio and pointing people in different directions. Margaret thought about approaching him, but he seemed too busy and stressed to help one confused old woman. As the sun got lower, Margaret noticed that fewer people were around. The evening crowd was thinning out, and soon the area would be much quieter. The thought of being alone in the dark made her chest feel tight with worry. She had always prided herself on being strong and independent. After her husband died 5 years ago, she had learned to do everything herself. She paid her own bills, maintained her house, and drove wherever she needed to go. Her children often offered to help, but she always insisted she was fine on her own. But lately things had been different. Small things at first. She would forget where she put her keys or why she walked into a room. Sometimes she would start cooking dinner and forget she had already eaten. Her daughter Linda had been gently suggesting that maybe it was time to see a doctor about these little memory problems. Margaret had finally agreed to the doctor's visit that morning. The doctor had been kind, but serious. He used words like cognitive decline in early stages. He recommended tests and specialists and support groups. It all felt overwhelming. Now, sitting on the cold concrete ledge as darkness began to fall, Margaret realized that those little memory problems were bigger than she had wanted to admit. She couldn't remember which parking garage she had used, She couldn't remember if she had paid for parking or how long she had been walking around. Everything felt jumbled together like puzzle pieces that didn't fit. A police car drove slowly past the station, and Margaret thought about flagging it down. But what would she say? That she was old and confused? That she couldn't remember where she parked? She felt embarrassed and ashamed. She had always been the one helping others, not the one who needed help. The air was getting colder, and Margaret pulled her blue coat tighter around her shoulders. She watched the last of the commuters hurrying home to their families, to warm dinners and comfortable chairs and people who loved them. She wondered if anyone would notice if she just sat here all night. Margaret closed her eyes and tried to remember the morning. She had eaten breakfast, fed her cat Whiskers, and driven downtown. But everything after the doctor's appointment was blurry. It was like trying to see through fog. When she opened her eyes again, most of the people were gone. The station area was much quieter now, with just a few stragglers and some people who seemed to be settling in for the night in doorways and corners. Margaret had never paid much attention to these people before, but now she noticed them because they were the only ones left. She sat there as the streetlights came on, feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. All those years of being strong and independent seemed far away now. All she wanted was to go home to Whiskers and her comfortable chair and her familiar surroundings. But first, she needed someone to care enough to help her find her way. Danny had been watching the old lady for almost an hour. From his spot in the doorway of an abandoned shop across from the station, he could see her sitting on that concrete ledge, looking more lost and worried as time passed. Danny knew what it felt like to be invisible. For the past 3 years, since he lost his construction job and then his apartment, he had become an expert at being overlooked. People walked past him every day like he wasn't there. Sometimes he wondered if he really was disappearing bit by bit. But Danny still noticed things. It was part of surviving on the streets. You learned to watch people, to read situations, to see things that others missed. And right now, he could see that this elderly woman was in trouble. Danny was 45 years old, though living rough had aged him beyond his years. His clothes were clean but worn, and he carried everything he owned in a weathered backpack. He had been a good worker once, building houses and fixing things with his hands. But a fall from scaffolding had injured his back, and when the workers' compensation ran out, everything else fell apart too. The depression that followed had been darker than any night he'd spent sleeping outside. There were days when he couldn't even get up from whatever doorway or bench he'd found for shelter. Social services felt like a maze he couldn't navigate, especially when his head wasn't clear. Before he knew it, months had passed, then years. But Danny had never lost his basic sense of right and wrong. His mother had raised him to help people when they needed it, even if you didn't have much to give. She used to say that kindness was free and everyone could afford it. Now, watching Margaret sit alone as darkness fell, Danny felt his mother's voice in his head. This woman needed help, and everyone else had ignored her. It didn't matter that Danny had nothing. It didn't matter that most people crossed the street when they saw him coming. This lady was scared and alone, and that was something Danny understood completely. Danny stood up slowly, his back aching from sleeping on hard surfaces. He picked up his backpack and walked across the street. As he got closer, he could see that Margaret was crying quietly, trying to wipe her tears with a tissue from her purse. "Ma'am," Danny said softly, stopping a few feet away so he wouldn't startle her. "Are you okay?" Margaret looked up, and Danny saw the fear flash across her face. He was used to that reaction. People saw his rough appearance, his worn clothes, and they immediately felt afraid. Usually he just walked away when he saw that look, but this time he stayed put. "I'm not going to hurt you," Danny said gently. "I just noticed you've been sitting here for a while and you look upset. Is there something I can do to help?" Margaret studied his face. Despite his rough appearance, his eyes were kind. There was something gentle about the way he spoke, like he was talking to someone he cared about. She had expected him to ask for money or make her feel more afraid, but instead he seemed genuinely concerned. "I'm lost," Margaret said simply. "I can't remember where I parked my car and everyone is too busy to help me." Danny nodded. He understood feeling forgotten by the world. That's scary, he said. Being lost is one of the worst feelings. Can I sit down next to you? Maybe we can figure this out together. Margaret hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Danny sat down on the concrete ledge, leaving some space between them so she wouldn't feel crowded. He set his backpack down carefully. What's your name? Danny asked. Margaret Thompson, she replied. I live on Maple Street, about 20 minutes from here. At least I think it's 20 minutes. Everything seems different today. I'm Danny, he said. I know this area pretty well. I've been around here for a while. Do you remember anything about where you parked? Was it a parking garage or on the street? Margaret closed her eyes, trying to remember. I think it was a garage. There were several levels, and I remember thinking I should write down where I parked, but then I didn't. She opened her eyes and looked at Danny with frustration. I used to be so organized. I never forgot things like this. Danny heard the pain in her voice. It wasn't just about finding a car. This woman was dealing with something bigger, something that scared her more than being lost. Hey, that's okay, Danny said. Everyone forgets things sometimes, and there are only 3 big parking garages around here. We can check them all if we need to. Do you remember what color your car is? Blue, Margaret said, looking a little more hopeful. It's a blue Honda. My daughter helped me pick it out 2 years ago when my old car finally died. Danny smiled. Blue Honda. That's good. That's something we can work with. He looked around at the area. Did you come from the direction of the medical building? I saw you walking from over there earlier. Margaret was surprised. You saw me? I didn't notice anyone paying attention. I notice a lot of things, Danny said. When you don't have much to do, you watch people. You seemed upset when you left that building, and then you've been trying to get help ever since. For the first time in hours, Margaret felt like someone actually saw her. Not as an inconvenience or an interruption, but as a person who mattered. I had a doctor's appointment, she explained. He told me some things that are hard to hear, about my memory, and then when I tried to find my car, I couldn't remember anything clearly. Danny nodded. He didn't push for more details. He had learned that sometimes people just needed someone to listen without judgment. You know what? Danny said. I bet a lot of people would have trouble remembering where they parked after getting difficult news from a doctor. That's not unusual, at all. Your brain was dealing with important stuff, not parking details. Margaret looked at him with surprise. This man, who society had apparently forgotten, was offering her more compassion and understanding than anyone else had all day. Why are you helping me? She asked. Everyone else was too busy. Danny was quiet for a moment. Because you needed help, he said simply. And because I know what it's like when people look right through you like you don't exist. Nobody should have to feel that way. Margaret felt something shift inside her chest. Shame, maybe, for the times she had hurried past people like Danny without really seeing them. Gratitude for his kindness. And something else. A recognition that this man had dignity and worth that had nothing to do with his circumstances. Thank you, Danny, she said. I was starting to think I'd be sitting here all night. Not on my watch, Danny said, standing up and extending his hand to help her up. Let's go find your car, Margaret. I've got nowhere else to be, and I know these streets better than anyone. Danny helped Margaret stand up from the concrete ledge, and together they began walking toward the first parking garage. Margaret was surprised by how gentle Danny was, matching his pace to hers and staying close enough that she felt safe but not crowded. This is the closest garage to the medical building, Danny explained as they approached a 5-story concrete structure. If you parked here after your appointment and then walked around trying to find your way back, this would make sense. The parking garage was dimly lit and their footsteps echoed as they walked through the first level. Danny had a small flashlight on his keychain, which he used to help them see better between the overhead lights. Blue Honda. Blue Honda, Margaret muttered to herself as they walked past rows of cars. But after checking the entire first level, there was no sign of her car. Don't worry, Danny said, noticing Margaret's growing anxiety. There are 4 more levels. We'll find it. They took the elevator to the second level. Margaret was getting tired, but Danny kept encouraging her. You're doing great, he said. I bet it's on one of the upper levels. People always drive up looking for spots. On the third level, Margaret suddenly stopped. Danny, I think I remember something. When I parked, I could see the top of that tall building with the red sign. Does that help? Danny looked around and spotted the building she meant. Yes, that definitely helps. From here, you'd need to be on the fourth or fifth level to see that sign clearly. Let's head up. When the elevator doors opened on the fourth level, Margaret let out a small gasp. There in the third row was her blue Honda. That's it, she said, walking quickly toward the car. Oh, thank goodness. Danny, you found it. But when Margaret reached her car and tried to unlock it with her key fob, her relief quickly turned to concern. Her hands were shaking and she couldn't quite remember how to adjust the mirrors or which way to turn to get out of the parking garage. Danny noticed her confusion. Margaret, are you feeling okay to drive? It's been a long, stressful day for you. Margaret sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel. Everything felt unfamiliar, even in her own car. The dashboard lights seemed too bright and she couldn't remember which pedal was which for a moment. The fear in her eyes was clear. I don't think I can drive, she whispered. I don't feel safe, but I don't know what else to do. I live alone, and my daughter lives an hour away. Danny thought for a moment. He could see that Margaret was not in any condition to drive safely, but he also knew that his options for helping were limited. As a homeless man, people would be suspicious of his motives, but he couldn't just leave her here. Margaret, I'm going to suggest something, and I want you to think about it carefully. I think we should call the police and ask for help. Not because you're in trouble, but because they can help make sure you get home safely. Margaret looked frightened. The police? Will they think something is wrong with me? Will they take my car away? No, Danny said firmly. They deal with situations like this all the time. You're not a criminal. You're someone who needs help getting home safely. There's no shame in that. And if we explain the situation, they can either help you drive home or call someone to come get you. Margaret was quiet for several minutes, thinking. Danny waited patiently, understanding that this was a big decision for her. Asking for official help felt like admitting that she couldn't take care of herself anymore. Okay, she finally said, but will you stay with me? I don't want to be alone when they get here. Of course, Danny said. I'll stay right here with you. Danny used his old cell phone to call the non-emergency police number. When the dispatcher answered, he explained the situation clearly and calmly. I'm calling to request assistance for an elderly woman who is safe but needs help getting home. She's disoriented and doesn't feel safe driving. Within 15 minutes, a police car arrived at the parking garage. Officer Lisa Rodriguez stepped out, a woman in her 30s with a kind face and patient demeanor. Danny had been worried about how the police would react to him, but Officer Rodriguez seemed focused on helping rather than judging. I'm Officer Rodriguez, she said, approaching Margaret and Danny. I understand you need some assistance getting home safely. Margaret explained her situation. The doctor's appointment, getting lost, and not feeling safe to drive. Officer Rodriguez listened carefully and asked a few gentle questions about Margaret's address and whether she had family nearby. Danny, here, help me find my car, Margaret said. Everyone else was too busy to help, but he stayed with me and made sure I was safe. Officer Rodriguez looked at Danny with newfound respect. That was very kind of you. It's not often we see people go out of their way to help strangers like this. Danny felt uncomfortable with the praise. Anyone would have done the same thing, he said quietly. Actually, no, Officer Rodriguez replied. Unfortunately, most people wouldn't have taken the time. What you did was special. Officer Rodriguez called Margaret's daughter Linda, whose number Margaret finally remembered. Linda was frantic with worry. She had been calling her mother's cell phone for hours after Margaret missed their planned dinner. Mom, I was so scared, Linda said when she arrived at the parking garage 45 minutes later. She was a woman in her early 50s, dressed in business clothes like she had rushed straight from work. I've been driving around looking for you everywhere. Linda hugged her mother tightly and then turned to Danny. Officer Rodriguez told me what you did. I can't thank you enough. In a world where people walk past others in need, you stopped to help my mother. Danny felt embarrassed by the attention. She just needed someone to care, he said simply. Linda looked at Danny more closely. Really looked at him. She saw past his worn clothes and rough appearance to the man who had spent hours helping her mother when he could have just walked away. This doesn't feel like enough, but please take this, Linda said, pulling out her wallet and offering Danny some money. Danny stepped back. I don't want money for helping. Your mom needed help and I was able to give it, that's all. Linda was surprised. But surely there's something I can do. Some way to thank you properly? Danny thought for a moment. Just take good care of her, he said. And maybe sometimes when you see someone who needs help, you'll remember today and stop to help them too. Officer Rodriguez arranged for Margaret's car to be safely parked in the garage overnight, and Linda drove her mother home. Before they left, Margaret rolled down the window. Danny, she said, I won't forget your kindness. You gave me hope when I thought there was none left. As they drove away, Danny stood in the parking garage with Officer Rodriguez. You did a really good thing today, she said. I see a lot of situations in this job, and what you did was remarkable. Danny picked up his backpack, preparing to find somewhere to sleep for the night. She reminded me of my mother, he said. My mom always said that helping people is what makes us human. Officer Rodriguez watched Danny walk away and made a mental note to remember his name. In a job where she often saw the worst of humanity, meeting someone like Danny reminded her that there was still goodness in the world. Linda couldn't stop thinking about Danny. 3 days had passed since the incident at the parking garage, but the image of the homeless man who had helped her mother stayed in her mind. She kept thinking about how he had refused her money and asked for nothing in return except that she take care of Margaret. Linda worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized company downtown. She was successful, driven, and used to solving problems. But this situation felt different. How do you properly thank someone who saved your mother and wanted nothing in return? On Thursday morning, Linda made a decision. Instead of going straight to her office, she drove to the area around the train station. She wanted to find Danny and learn more about his story. It took her almost 2 hours of walking around and asking people before she spotted him sitting on a bench near the station, reading a worn paperback book. In the daylight, Linda could see details she had missed that night. Danny's clothes were old but clean. His hair was neatly combed. There was something dignified about the way he carried himself, even in his difficult circumstances. Danny? Linda approached carefully, not wanting to startle him. Danny looked up, surprised to see her. Linda? Is Margaret okay? Is something wrong? The fact that his first concern was for her mother's well-being touched Linda deeply. Mom's fine. She's staying with me for a few days while we figure some things out. I came here to find you. Danny closed his book and gave her his full attention. Why? Linda sat down on the bench next to him. Because what you did for my mother was extraordinary, and I want to understand how I can help you the way you helped her. Danny shifted uncomfortably. I told you I don't need anything. Your mom needed help and I was able to give it, that's all. But that's not all, Linda said gently. Danny, can I ask how you ended up living on the streets? You don't have to. Tell me if you don't want to, but I'd like to understand. Danny was quiet for a long time. He wasn't used to people asking about his story with genuine interest rather than judgment. Finally, he began to talk. I used to work construction. For 20 years, I built houses, office buildings, did renovation work. I was good at it too. Had my own small crew for a while. Danny's voice was steady, but Linda could hear the pain underneath. 3 years ago, I fell from some scaffolding on a job site. Hurt my back pretty bad. Linda listened without interrupting as Danny continued his story. The workers' compensation covered the medical bills for a while, but when that ran out, I couldn't work. Construction is physical work. You can't do it with a bad back. I tried to find other jobs, but I didn't have office skills or computer training. Danny explained how quickly everything had fallen apart. First, he couldn't pay rent. Then he lost his apartment. His savings disappeared. The depression that followed made it hard to think clearly or navigate the complex social services system. "I'm not making excuses," Danny said. "I know other people have overcome worse situations. But once you're on the streets, everything becomes harder. You can't get a job without an address. You can't get an address without a job. People look at you differently. After a while, you start to feel invisible." Linda felt her throat tighten as she listened. "Danny, you're not invisible. What you did for my mother proves that you're a remarkable person. Your circumstances don't define your character." Danny looked at her with surprise. "Most people don't see it that way." "Then most people are wrong," Linda said firmly. "And I think it's time someone proved that to you." Over the next hour, Linda learned more about Danny's background. He had completed high school and had taken some community college classes in building trades. He was well-read, articulate, and had a strong work ethic despite his current situation. He had simply fallen through the cracks of a system that wasn't designed to catch people like him. "Danny, I have an idea," Linda said. "But I want you to hear me out completely before you say no." Danny nodded, curious. "I know people in construction and property management. Good people who care more about character than circumstances. I also know someone who runs a program that helps people transition from homelessness back to stable housing and employment. It's not charity, it's opportunity." Danny started to shake his head, but Linda held up her hand. "You helped my mother when no one else would. You showed kindness, patience, and integrity. Those are exactly the qualities that good employers are looking for. All you need is a chance to show what you can do." "Linda, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but—" "What if it was your mother?" Linda interrupted gently. "What if your mother was lost and scared and someone helped her? Wouldn't you want to find a way to help that person if you could?" Danny was quiet, thinking about his mother who had passed away 5 years earlier. She had always believed in helping others and accepting help when it was offered with good intentions. "I don't want to be anyone's charity case," Danny said finally. "You wouldn't be," Linda assured him. "These are real jobs with real expectations. You'd have to prove yourself every day just like everyone else. The only difference is that you'd get a fair chance to do it." Linda pulled out her phone and showed Danny some information about a construction company owned by her friend Mike Torres. Mike's company does renovation work on older buildings. He's been looking for experienced workers who understand craftsmanship, not just speed. She also showed him information about a transitional housing program that helped people find apartments and provided support during the adjustment period. "Think about it," Linda said. "You don't have to decide today. But Danny, you have skills and experience that people need. Your current situation doesn't erase 20 years of construction experience." Danny stared at the information on Linda's phone. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately, but another part was afraid of hoping for something that might not work out, afraid of disappointing people who believed in him. "What if I fail?" Danny asked quietly. "What if I can't handle being around people in an office environment anymore? What if my back problems come back?" Linda understood his fear. "Then we'll figure out something else. Failure isn't permanent, Danny. But not trying means never knowing what might be possible." Danny thought about Margaret, sitting alone and forgotten until someone noticed her need. He thought about how good it had felt to help someone, to matter to another human being. "Okay," Danny said finally. "I'll try, but I want to do this the right way. I want to earn whatever I get." Linda smiled. "I wouldn't expect anything less from the man who helped my mother." As they parted ways that day, Linda felt hopeful for the first time since the incident. Danny walked away with Linda's phone number and the promise of introductions to people who might give him a chance. Neither of them realized that their conversation had been overheard by a local news reporter who was in the area covering a different story. The reporter, intrigued by what she had witnessed, began to research the story of the homeless man who had helped a lost elderly woman. Within a week, the story would be on the evening news, inspiring dozens of other people to volunteer at local shelters and support programs for homeless individuals. Danny's simple act of kindness was creating ripples that would spread far beyond what either he or Linda could have imagined. 6 months later, Danny stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his small one-bedroom apartment, adjusting the collar of his work shirt. It was still hard to believe that this was his life now. A steady job, a place to call home, and hope for the future. The transition hadn't been easy. The first few weeks of working for Mike Torres's construction company had been challenging. Danny's body needed time to readjust to physical labor, and his confidence had taken years to rebuild. There were days when he felt overwhelmed by being around so many people after years of isolation. But Mike had been patient and understanding. He had seen something in Danny that reminded him of his own father, a skilled craftsman who took pride in doing things right. Mike gave Danny smaller projects at first, allowing him to rebuild his confidence while contributing meaningfully to the team. Danny's skills came back faster than anyone expected. His 20 years of experience showed in the careful way he measured twice and cut once, in his ability to see potential problems before they became expensive mistakes, and in his willingness to teach younger workers the finer points of the trade. Kiwili, transitional housing program, had been equally important. Living in a small efficiency apartment for the first 3 months had given Danny time to adjust to having his own space again. The program's counselor, Janet Williams, had helped him navigate the practical challenges of rebuilding his life, opening a bank account, establishing credit, learning to budget for rent and utilities. Now, Danny was renting his own apartment, in a quiet neighborhood about 10 minutes from work. It wasn't fancy, but it was his. He had a comfortable bed, a small kitchen where he cooked his own meals, and a living room where he could read his books in peace. The best part of Danny's new life, however, was the sense of purpose he had rediscovered. Once a week, he volunteered at the downtown homeless shelter where he had sometimes stayed during his worst periods. He helped newcomers understand the available services and navigate the complicated process of applying for assistance. Danny's story had become somewhat famous after that news report 6 months ago. The reporter had tracked down both Danny and Margaret, creating a feature story about kindness and second chances that had touched thousands of viewers. The attention had been overwhelming at first, but it had also brought support and opportunities that Danny never could have imagined. Today was special, though. Today was Margaret's 79th birthday, and Danny had been invited to her celebration. Linda had arranged a small party at Margaret's house on Maple Street. Margaret was doing much better now. The doctor had confirmed that she was in the early stages of dementia, but with proper medication and support, her condition was stable. She had moved in with Linda temporarily, but they were working on a plan that would allow Margaret to maintain some independence while ensuring her safety. Danny arrived at the house carrying a small wrapped gift, a photo album he had put together, with pictures from his volunteer work at the shelter. He wanted to show Margaret how her kindness had inspired him to help others. "Danny!" Margaret exclaimed when she opened the door. Her face lit up with genuine joy. "I'm so happy you're here. Come in, come in." The house was warm and inviting, decorated with balloons and flowers. About a dozen people were there. Linda and her family, some of Margaret's neighbors, and a few friends from her former job at the library. Danny felt a little nervous in the social setting, but Linda quickly made him feel welcome. "Everyone, this is Danny, the man I told you about who helped my mother." Danny was uncomfortable with being the center of attention, but he was touched by how warmly everyone welcomed him. These people had heard his story and saw him not as a former homeless man, but as someone who had made a difference in Margaret's life. During the party, Danny found himself talking with Margaret's neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, who had recently lost his wife. "I've been feeling pretty lost since Helen died," Frank confided. 43 years of marriage, and now I don't know what to do with myself." Danny listened carefully and then shared some of what he had learned about starting over later in life. "The hardest part is taking the first step," he said. "But once you do, you realize you're stronger than you thought." Linda watched this conversation from across the room and smiled. Danny had a natural ability to connect with people who were struggling. It was a gift that his difficult experiences had deepened rather than diminished. When it came time for Margaret to open her gifts, Danny nervously presented his photo album. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she looked through the pictures of Danny working with other homeless individuals, helping them navigate services and find hope. "Danny, this is beautiful," she said. Look how many people you're helping now. That man who stopped to help me has become someone who helps so many others. Danny felt his own eyes getting misty. You gave me hope that night, Margaret. When everyone else walked past you, I saw myself. Someone who needed help and wasn't getting it. Helping you reminded me that I was still worth something, that I could still make a difference. Linda stood up to make a toast. 6 months ago, my mother was lost and scared, and most people were too busy to care. But Danny saw her as a person who mattered. Today, Danny has a job he loves, a home, and he's helping other people find their way back from some very dark places. She raised her glass to second chances, to the power of kindness, and to the reminder that we all have something valuable to offer, no matter what our circumstances look like. Everyone raised their glasses, and Danny felt overwhelmed by the love and support in the room. This was so different from the isolation and invisibility he had experienced for years. After the party, as Danny was getting ready to leave, Margaret pulled him aside. "I have something for you too," she said, handing him a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that read, "Danny, thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for reminding me that there are still good people in the world. Your kindness saved me that night, but I think it saved you too. Love, Margaret." Danny hugged Margaret goodbye, promising to visit again soon. As he drove home to his apartment, he reflected on how much his life had changed. The job with Mike's company was going well. Danny had been promoted to crew leader and was training new workers. His back still bothered him sometimes, but he had learned to manage it with proper stretching and occasional physical therapy. More importantly, Danny had rediscovered his sense of worth. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He was contributing to his community, helping others, and building a future he could be proud of. The ripple effects of that one night continued to spread. The news story about Danny and Margaret had inspired the city to train transit workers and police officers on how to better assist vulnerable individuals. Several local businesses had started hiring programs specifically designed to give homeless individuals a second chance. Linda had become an advocate for homeless services, using her marketing skills to raise awareness and funding for programs that helped people transition back to stable housing and employment. As Danny unlocked the door to his apartment that evening, he thought about his mother's words about kindness, being free and everyone being able to afford it. He had learned that kindness was actually an investment. When you gave it away, it somehow came back to you multiplied. Danny settled into his comfortable chair with a book, feeling grateful for the unexpected turn his life had taken. Tomorrow he would go back to work, building and fixing things with his hands. This weekend he would volunteer at the shelter, helping other people find their way back to hope. But tonight, he would simply enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had found his way home, not just to an apartment, but to a life that had meaning and purpose again. And it had all started with choosing to see and help one lost woman when everyone else looked away.